This is quite the journey we've been on, folks, but this episode is going to be the big one. We're slaying the Japanese hydra known as conjugation. Conjugation is by far the most difficult thing for people learning Japanese to grasp, but after you grasp it, the entire language opens up to you in a new way. For those who don't know, conjugation is the act of specifying the tense of a verb or adjective. This might not be totally clear still, so let me give you an example. We all recognize this word, right? It's run. To say that this is what we're currently doing, we add some stuff to it so it looks like running. We can also point out that it's something we already did. Or how about say we plan on doing it in the future? These are all examples of conjugation, and it's the focus of today's lesson. Before we get started, I'm going to give you the list of words to learn first. Nomu means to drink, and yes, it does also mean to go out drinking alcohol and getting drunk. Taberu means to eat. Kau means to buy. Sukau means to use. It can be used directly, as in using a pair of scissors, or it can be used indirectly, as in I use the bus to get to work. Kiku means to listen. Miru means to see, although miru can also mean to watch. Like if you're watching television or watching a movie, that is also miru. Asobu means to play. Hashiru means to run. Iku means to go. And finally, suru means to do or perform. You may be wondering why I specifically have a picture of kids playing Yu-Gi-Oh up here, but trust me, it'll make sense soon. Now you may have noticed an interesting pattern. All verbs end in an oo sound. The inverse isn't true, obviously. Not every single word that ends in an oo is a verb, but every verb will always end in an oo. It's also important to point out that the version of the words I just taught you are known as dictionary form. That means it's the most basic way to say, search, and look up that word. Now on to actual conjugation. When we're conjugating a Japanese verb, we need to answer two questions. Is our sentence happening in the past or the future? And is the verb true or false? The words here have slightly different meanings than what you may be used to. Past verbs are verbs that you've already done or things that you used to do and you don't anymore. A future verb is one that you plan on doing soon or you do regularly. True and false don't have to do with telling the truth or telling a lie. They more have to do with did or did not a verb happen, or will not a verb happen. There is a way to say something in the present tense, as in you are in the middle of doing something, but we'll learn about that later. Now your answer should lie somewhere on this chart. If the verb is something that will happen or does happen regularly, then it will end in mas. Again, just like in des from last episode, notice that the su at the end of mas is pronounced with a silent u. If a verb will not happen or does not happen regularly, then it will end in masen. If a verb has already happened or used to happen frequently, then it ends in mashita. I'd like to point out again here that the I is silent. Mashita. Finally, we get to the most complicated one. If a verb did not happen or did not occur frequently, then it is ended with masen deshita. You may have figured this out already, but the deshita at the end of masen deshita is actually us conjugating the word des from last episode. Conjugating des gets a little complicated, so we won't get too far into it here, but essentially what's happening here is we are making the verb negative with masen, and then using deshita to put the sentence in the past. This type of conjugation normally throws off English speakers because in English, we use extra words to put the verb in the past or present and say whether it's true or false. This same chart in English, using a word like eat, would read will eat, will not eat, did eat, and did not eat. See, in English, the context comes from adding more words. In Japanese, the context comes from changing the last word of the sentence. Yes! I hear you shout. I just have to memorize this stupid chart and I'm all done with conjugation. Japanese is pretty easy after all. I really wish that were the case, but you're not done. Remember earlier when I taught you all those words and I told you that they were the dictionary form? What I was alluding to is the fact that verbs often change when you're actually using them in sentences.
Oh my gosh, then kudou, just tell me what to do with verbs so I can start using them.
I'd love to, but unfortunately, it's not that simple. Something else you'll learn about the Japanese language is they love separating stuff into groups. With verbs, a verb will fall into one of 3 groups, and from there you will learn how to turn them into an actual verb you can use. We'll start with Godon because they're the most common. From the 10 verbs we learned today, these 7 are Godon verbs. For simplicity's sake, we also call this Group 1. In order to conjugate with a Group 1 verb, you have to turn the U in the end to an I.
Well, kudou, is that really it?
Yes, actually. The difficulty in learning Japanese comes from having to memorize a bunch of different things, but normally the things you actually have to memorize are pretty simple. Now let's put this into practical use. I hope you remember the previous lessons because I'm about to bring them up. Watashi wa sake o nomimasu. I drink alcohol. Watashi wa sake o nomimasen. I do not drink alcohol. Watashi wa sake o nomimashita. I did drink alcohol. Watashi wa sake o nomimasen deshita. I did not drink alcohol. See guys, it's not so bad. There's just a lot to remember. Plus I even ramped it up to speaking speed gradually and you probably still understood me. Now for our next group, Ichidan verbs. Of the group of verbs I taught you today, 2 of them were Ichidan. This is also, for simplicity's sake, also called Group 2. Ichidan verbs are easy to recognize because they'll always end in an IRU or an ERU. Oh, what's that? I can hear you typing. Kudou, there seems to be a flaw in your video. You mistakenly put the word hashiru, to run, in your Group 1 verb list.
Kudou, you simpleton. I can clearly see that it ends in an IRU.
Yeah, I guess we could talk about this. Sometimes Japanese words don't follow the rules that they themselves set, and there's no explanation as to why. Sometimes, even if you have a word pegged completely right, it's wrong for no apparent reason. So you should always double check a word and never assume. I assure you, these are the only 2 Ichidan verbs that I taught today. Believe it or not, turning these into usable words is actually easier than the Godon verbs. The ru on the end has to disappear. And that's it. That is literally all you do for Group 2 verbs. Inu wa niku o tabemasu. Dogs eat meat. Sakana wa kuramono o tabemasen. Fish will not eat fruit. Neko wa mizu o nomimashita. The cat drank some water. Neko wa sakana o tabemasen deshita. The cat did not eat the fish. Oh, thank the Lord. Good kitty. The last group we have to look at is irregular. In the list of verbs I taught you earlier today, I taught you 1 irregular verb. Now, to be completely honest, irregular's not even like a real list, but we're gonna call it Group 3 anyway. Irregular verbs are verbs that don't conjugate in Ichidan or Godon, but follow their own set of rules. Luckily, there's only a few of these in the entire language, and only a couple of them are actually used. Suru, to do, is the most important one to learn. When suru conjugates, it becomes she. There's no rules, there's nothing complicated to learn, that's just the way it works. I don't feel like I need to go into another round of testing, but I do want to tell you something interesting about suru. You'll remember when I taught you suru, I used this image of kids playing Yu-Gi-Oh! That's because in America, we might say that we are playing a game or playing a round, but in Japan, when you're performing some kind of hobby or playing some kind of game, you actually use suru. So you would never say that you asobimasu card games. The correct way to say that you play card games is to say kaado gemu wo shimasu. It's the name of the activity, then the particle o, and then shimasu. I do card games. Of course, you can also conjugate this to say I do not play card games, I did play a card game, or I did not play a card game. But I trust that you know all that by now.
So kudou, did I do it? Am I done with verbs?
Yes. Yes! I survived the lesson! But we're not actually done yet. Yes, sadly, there's still some more things I need to go over. So we need to learn about implied topics. I know we spent a lot of time using the wa particle, but in natural Japanese, if it's very obvious what it is you're talking about, you don't actually have to mark anything with wa. The general rule of thumb is if you are stating something out loud and you're not already in the middle of talking about something, or if it's not obvious what you're talking about, then everybody assumes you're talking about yourself. Like if you say, restaurant de tabemashita. Well, let's see. The thing that happened was did eat, and it happened the restaurant de, which means at a restaurant. Unless something specific is going on, it's implied that you're saying that you yourself, the speaker, ate at a restaurant. It's not grammatically incorrect to leave the watashi wa off of this statement because it's obvious that you're talking about yourself. Of course, it could also be something weird, like maybe after work you decided to eat somewhere and you didn't get your wife anything, and when you got home she was like, "Restaurant de tabemashita." In which case, the topic of the sentence is obviously you because she's making the accusation at you. And you probably did it too, you jerk. In Japanese, you have to use the situation and your surroundings to figure out what people are talking about sometimes. But the trade-off is, because you don't have to constantly point out the obvious, you don't have to say as much stuff when you talk. Now, along with this lesson, I'm also going to teach you 2 new words. That's right, you're getting 12 words today, baby. Suki means like, kirai means dislike. These are weird words to teach because in English, to like or to dislike is a verb. But in Japanese, like and dislike are actually adjectives. That's right, we're going to dip into adjectives a little bit. Now, I'm not going to get into adjectives too deep because they're this whole huge thing. They're going to require their own video, but because this particular type of adjective is so close to verbs, I think it's easy to teach here. Plus, we can use it to practice implied topics. Now, you should know how to do this just based on everything we've talked about so far, but to say that you like or dislike something, you say what it is you like or dislike. In this case, we'll use niku. Ga, not wa. Remember, it's implied that we are the wa because we are just making a statement and there's no other topic that we're talking about. If we were already in the middle of talking about somebody else, then everything we're saying would apply to them, but because we didn't, it's applying to us. Therefore, the niku is marked with ga and not wa. Ski, like, meat. Now we're just pointing out the fact that we like something here, so there's not a verb we can put on the end. But if you've been a good student, you'll remember there's a verb filler word, desu. Niku ga suki desu. Someone likes meat, and it's implied that that someone is me. Saying that you like and dislike stuff is a great way to practice getting used to implied topics, and it's also an awesome way to build your vocabulary if you look up words for things that you like and dislike. Another thing we need to talk about is using the correct particles. I cannot stress this point enough. When you practice using nouns, always practice attaching particles to them and learning new particles. Failing to do this can make you look really, really dumb.